If you watch a heavy pane of glass just like slip from someone's hands and drop onto a concrete floor, there is this absolute unavoidable inevitability to what happens
Oh,
next.
yeah, it hits and it just completely shatters.
Exactly. It shatters into thousands of irrecoverable shards, and you don't even question it. I mean, the material is fundamentally brittle, the impact is severe, and the kinetic energy just has nowhere else to go.
Right, it's totally binary, it's intact, and then it's permanently destroyed.
Yeah, and our brains are sort of wired to expect that exact same binary outcome when we look at structural integrity. If the pressure exceeds the capacity, the object breaks. It just makes intuitive physical sense.
It does, but then you look at human beings navigating these massive life-altering adversities, and those predictable laws of physics just suddenly stop applying.
Which is wild, because you can observe two people who experience the exact same catastrophic event, like a sudden and devastating job loss, or the end of a decades-long marriage, or even a severe medical diagnosis, and one person just shatters seemingly overnight. They're completely unable to function.
Right, while the other person, who is experiencing the exact same kinetic impact, somehow absorbs it. I mean, they bend, they distort, they adapt, and eventually they move forward.
So the big question for this deep dive is why? Why does the human mind fracture in one instance, but forge itself into something profoundly more capable in another?
And that is like the ultimate psychological mystery.
Hmm.
It's what the American Psychological Association has spent decades trying to decode. And what they've discovered completely upends the cultural narrative we have about mental toughness.
The whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps thing.
Exactly. The foundational insight from the APA's research, and this is the paradigm shift you really have to grasp before we go any further, is that psychological resilience is not a fixed personality trait.
Right, so it's not just some genetic lottery ticket.
Absolutely not. We have this really pervasive myth that some people are just born with a thicker skin,
Yeah.
that they are inherently tough, and the rest of us are simply fragile and out of luck.
Yeah, we totally romanticize that.
We do. But the APA explicitly rejects that. Resilience is an active, dynamic process. It is a highly specific set of mental, emotional, and behavioral adaptations that, honestly, literally anyone can systematically learn, cultivate, and strengthen over time.
So it's much less like the rigid structural integrity of that pane of glass and much more like the architecture of a massive suspension bridge.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right. Because the bridge isn't strong because it's rigid. It's strong because it is explicitly designed to sway and flex and distribute massive amounts of stress without snapping.
Exactly. It's engineered for flexibility.
And today, our mission is to look at the engineering blueprints for that bridge. We are diving deep into the APA's framework for psychological resilience, but we aren't going to just float around in the academic theory of stress psychology here.
No, because theory doesn't help you when you're in the middle of a crisis.
Exactly. We're taking this heavily researched clinical framework and translating it into a highly practical 7-day resilience training plan. We are breaking down the APA's 4 core pillars into a daily schedule of applied, beginner-friendly tasks that you can literally start running today.
And I think framing this as a scheduled protocol is just so vital because it addresses the sheer friction of a crisis.
The friction. What do you mean by that?
Well, when you are standing in the wreckage of a life event, your cognitive bandwidth is virtually zero. If I just hand you a dense clinical paper on behavioral flexibility, it's useless.
Yeah, you can't even read a grocery list, let alone a psych paper.
Exactly. You need a sequential roadmap. You need to know exactly what to do on day one, because figuring it out yourself requires energy you simply do not possess right now.
Right. Let's talk about that friction. Because when the bottom falls out of your life, the immediate, overwhelming human instinct is often to do the exact opposite of what the APA says we should do.
Oh, completely.
When we are deeply hurt or ashamed or terrified, the primal urge is to retreat into a dark room and just shut the door. We isolate.
We do. And, I mean, from an evolutionary standpoint, the urge to hide when you are wounded makes total sense. You want to avoid predators.
Sure, lay low until you heal.
Right, but in a modern psychological crisis, the APA warns that isolation actually acts as a massive amplifier for stress. When you are entirely alone with your crisis, the threat feels exponentially larger.
Because there is no external reality to check your catastrophic thoughts against.
Exactly. The panic just endlessly echoes in the chamber of your own mind. It compounds.
So to interrupt that feedback loop, the APA introduces Pillar 1, which is building your connections. We need external scaffolding before we can work on the internal structure.
Yes, which brings us to the first step in our protocol. Day 1, Monday.
Okay, day one. What are we doing?
We are prioritizing compassionate relationships. The specific task here is to reach out to one person who validates your feelings rather than someone who tries to fix your problem.
Okay, wait, let me pause you there. If my life is falling apart, wouldn't I want someone to fix it?
It seems like it, right?
Yeah. I mean, if I look at my own circle, my closest friends are all chronic fixers, the kind of people who, the second I say I'm in trouble, they pull out a metaphorical whiteboard, they start mapping out action plans, and they offer like 5 unsolicited solutions.
They're the problem solvers.
Right, and they genuinely mean well, and they are usually very competent people. So why is the APA telling me to explicitly avoid my most competent friends on day one of a crisis?
Because we have to look at what the fixer is actually responding to. Very often, when you present a massive, messy, painful problem to a fixer, your pain triggers their anxiety.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The ambiguity of your suffering makes them deeply uncomfortable. So by instantly offering a solution, they aren't just trying to help you. They are subconsciously trying to neutralize their own discomfort.
Wow. So they want the messy emotion to go away so they can feel competent and safe again.
In many cases, yes. And while their intentions might be totally pure, the psychological impact on you, the person in crisis, is devastating.
Because you don't feel heard.
Exactly. There is a profound biological difference between feeling validated and feeling managed. If you come to someone shattered saying, I have no idea how I'm going to survive this, and they immediately respond with, okay, here are 3 emails you need to send right now, they have entirely bypassed your emotional reality.
Yeah, they are inadvertently sending a message that your raw pain is unacceptable and needs to be cleaned up immediately.
Right, which instantly makes you feel defensive. You feel like a project or a broken appliance that they're trying to tinker with, rather than a human being who's bleeding. It actually increases the isolation.
It totally does. It spikes your cortisol because you now feel misunderstood on top of feeling terrified.
Precisely. What you require on day 1 is someone who possesses the emotional bandwidth to simply sit in the dark with you. You need a validator.
Just someone who can say, I hear you. This is a nightmare. It is incredibly unfair, and it makes total biological and rational sense that you are falling apart right now.
Yes. So validation is essentially giving the nervous system permission to stand down.
That's the exact mechanism.
That's it. When someone accurately reflects your emotional state without trying to change it, it signals to your amygdala, which is the threat detection center of the brain, that you are seen, you are safe, and you are not facing the predator alone.
Wow.
Yeah, that external validation physically downregulates your parasympathetic nervous system and lowers your heart rate. Once you achieve that baseline of physiological safety, then maybe on day 10 or day 20, you can call the fixer for tactical advice.
Okay.
But on day 1, you must consciously select the validator.
I think acknowledging that timeline is such a relief. It gives you permission to say, I don't need a strategy today. I just need a witness.
Exactly. Just a witness.
So that covers the intimacy of day 1. But moving to day 2, Tuesday, the protocol shifts dramatically. We are still in pillar 1, building connections, but the task now is to engage in the collective.
Yes, we are moving from the micro to the macro.
The APA suggests looking into a civic group, a faith-based community, a support group, or some kind of local organization. But the friction here is enormous.
Oh, absolutely.
If it took all my energy on day 1 just to text my most empathetic friend, the idea of walking into a room full of strangers on day 2 when my personal life is a disaster feels completely overwhelming. Why zoom out to a whole group of people so quickly?
Well, it comes back to structural engineering again. A highly empathetic one-on-one relationship is a vital load-bearing pillar, but it is a single pillar.
I see.
Right? If your crisis is massive, or if that one supportive friend gets sick or has their own life event, that single pillar cannot sustain the entire weight of your psychological survival. The APA emphasizes that resilience requires a diversified infrastructure of support.
So if one pillar cracks, the roof doesn't cave in.
Correct. But beyond just having a backup plan, engaging with a group taps into a psychological phenomenon called collective belonging.
Collective belonging. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, when you suffer a profound loss, say you lose your career, your individual identity fractures, you don't know who you are anymore. If you step into a room of people who share a common purpose, even if it has nothing to do with your crisis, you anchor yourself to a broader human fabric.
You know, I've heard sociologists talk about the power of weak ties.
Yes, exactly.
Sometimes, like the barista you see every Tuesday or the people you sit next to in a community council meeting actually provide a unique kind of relief because they don't know the intricate details of your trauma. You don't have to perform your grief for them.
That is a brilliant point. The ambient belonging of a group allows you to exist in a space without the intense, focused pressure of a one-on-one interaction. You simply absorb the rhythm of the collective.
It reminds your nervous system that the world is much larger than the crisis currently incinerating your living room.
Yes, the world is still turning, people are still gathering, and you are still a part of that larger ecosystem.
That is a very stabilizing thought. So, days 1 and 2 are fundamentally about building the external scaffolding. We secure the intimate validator and we plug into the ambient collective.
Right.
But external scaffolding doesn't matter if the materials inside the beating are rotting away, which transitions us to section 2 of our protocol. Day 3 and day 4, diving into pillar 2, which is fostering wellness.
And this addresses the brutal, unavoidable connection between the mind and the body.
Yeah, the APA framework is unequivocal here, right? Cognitive resilience is biologically impossible if your physical hardware is deeply compromised.
Absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
We tend to treat the brain and the body as two separate entities, but stress is a profoundly physical event. It takes a staggering physiological toll on your endocrine system, your cardiovascular system, and your immune system.
So you really cannot outthink a crisis if your body is in a state of systemic depletion.
You can't.
I always think of it like trying to run the most complex, demanding software update on your smartphone while the battery indicator is flashing red at like 1%.
That is the perfect way to look at it.
Right. It doesn't matter how elegant the software code is. The physical hardware does not have the power to execute the operation. The system will crash. You have to physically plug the phone into the wall before you can even look at the software.
That analogy holds up perfectly under neurobiological scrutiny. And yet, the tragedy of human behavior is that when a crisis hits, basic physical maintenance is universally the very first thing we abandon.
Oh, 100%. We stop eating, or we just eat garbage. We stop moving. And most destructively, we stop sleeping.
Yes. So day 3, Wednesday, is entirely dedicated to plugging the phone into the wall. The task is to audit and aggressively defend your basic physical inputs. Proper nutrition, hydration, basic movement, and a non-negotiable target of 7 to 9 hours of sleep.
I know this can sound like aggressively mundane. When your marriage is collapsing or you are facing bankruptcy, someone telling you to drink water and go to bed feels almost insulting.
It does. It feels vastly disproportionate to the scale of the threat.
Right. It feels like throwing a cup of water on a forest fire.
Exactly. But we have to understand the mechanism of why the APA insists on this. Let's look at the biology of the stress response.
Yeah. Okay, lay it out for us.
When you perceive a threat, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, floods your bloodstream with adrenaline and cortisol. This is the fight or flight response. Your heart rate spikes, your blood pressure rises, and glucose is dumped into your muscles so you can physically fight or run away.
Which was incredibly useful tens of thousands of years ago when the threat was a physical predator. But today, the threat is an email from a divorce lawyer. You can't punch it in an email. You can't outrun a bank statement.
And that is the evolutionary mismatch. Your body is primed for intense physical action, but you are just sitting rigidly in a chair staring at a screen. That cortisol has nowhere to go, so it just marinates in your system.
That sounds awful.
It is. Now, add severe sleep deprivation to that chemical cocktail. If you aren't sleeping, your brain interprets that exhaustion as an additional critical threat. Your body assumes, well, we must be staying awake because the predator is still outside the cave. So it pumps out even more cortisol to keep you alert.
Wow. So it becomes a vicious, self-sustaining loop. The stress prevents you from sleeping, and the lack of sleep exponentially magnifies the biological stress.
Yes, the amygdala becomes wildly hyperactive when sleep deprived. Your emotional reactivity goes off the charts. Conversely, high-quality sleep, specifically REM sleep, acts as overnight neurochemical therapy.
Really? How so?
It processes emotional memories and strips away the visceral charge associated with them. So when you force yourself to sleep, to hydrate, and to walk around the block, you are actively communicating with your nervous system in a language it understands.
You are sending biological signals of safety?
Exactly. You are lowering the allostatic load, which is the physiological wear and tear on your body, so your brain actually has the cognitive bandwidth to process the trauma.
Framing self-care not as luxury pampering, but as tactical biological armor fundamentally changes the approach. I love that. But the APA source material also issues a severe warning here regarding how we attempt to cope when the physical pain becomes unbearable.
Yes, the reliance on negative outlets. This is where the protocol demands radical honesty. The sheer agony of a crisis creates a desperate demand for immediate relief. People turn to alcohol, prescription abuse, or compulsive behaviors just to turn the cognitive volume down for a few hours.
The urge to numb out is so powerful, but the source material warns that this isn't actually addressing the problem.
To borrow from the financial world, using substances to numb emotional trauma is like taking out a payday loan at a 400% interest rate to pay off a mortgage.
Oof, that's a grim picture.
It is, but it's accurate. You get a fleeting illusion of solvency today, but you are structurally guaranteeing your own bankruptcy tomorrow. Alcohol, for instance, is a central nervous system depressant. It might artificially sedate the panic for an evening, but it chemically disrupts the exact REM sleep architecture we just established is vital for emotional processing.
So it fundamentally degrades the biological hardware you need to survive the crisis.
Precisely. It allows the root trauma to fester and metastasize while stripping away your capacity to fight it.
It is a profound structural betrayal of your own body. So day 3 is about aggressive physical defense, defending your sleep, your hydration, and rejecting the high-interest emotional loans of substance abuse.
Exactly.
That brings us to day 4, Thursday, which shifts from physical wellness to the mental step back. The task is to engage in a mindfulness practice, whether that is structured journaling, meditation, or prayer, but with a highly specific mandate. You must actively identify and focus on elements of gratitude and areas of stability that still exist in your life.
And we immediately hit another wall of friction here, because telling someone in the depths of despair to practice gratitude borders on toxic positivity.
Wow.
It sounds incredibly dismissive.
Right. If I just lost my business, my life's work, and someone tells me to be grateful for the sunshine, I'm going to lose my mind.
You would be totally justified in that reaction. But the APA's definition of mindfulness in this context is not about pretending the terrible thing isn't happening. It is about actively fighting the brain's biological tendency toward tunnel vision.
Tunnel vision, meaning we only see the threat.
Exactly. When a severe threat emerges, the brain's attentional spotlight narrows to an extreme degree. It focuses 100% of your cognitive processing power entirely on the source of the pain.
Which, again, makes evolutionary sense. If you are being stalked by a predator, you don't dedicate processing power to admiring a beautiful tree. You lock onto the threat until you are safe.
Right. But in a prolonged modern crisis, that tunnel vision becomes catastrophic. Yeah. If you lose your business, your brain locks onto the failure, and it creates a psychological illusion that everything in your life is equally destroyed. The mindfulness task on day 4 is a deliberate, forceful widening of that cognitive aperture.
So it's an intentional override of the attentional spotlight.
Exactly. When you force yourself to sit down and write, "My business is gone, and I am devastated, but my physical health remains entirely intact. My children are safe. I have a supportive partner," you are not minimizing the loss of the business.
No, you are actively proving to your nervous system that the entire landscape of your life is not on fire. Just one quadrant is on fire.
Yes. By mapping out the areas of stability, you give yourself a firm, unburned patch of ground to stand on while you figure out how to address the flames.
It restores a sense of proportion. It dilutes the concentration of the panic. Okay, so halfway through the week, we have established our social scaffolding and we have secured our physical and mental wellness. We are ready for section 3 of the protocol. Day 5, transitioning into pillar 3, which is finding purpose.
Yes.
And to understand the necessity of this pillar, we have to look at the darkest potential outcome of unmanaged adversity. We have to talk about learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness is arguably the most dangerous psychological state a human being can enter. It is a concept originally identified by psychologist Martin Seligman in the late 1960s. At its core, learned helplessness is a state of profound cognitive paralysis. It occurs when an individual experiences repeated, unpredictable, and uncontrollable trauma or stress.
So they are getting hit over and over, and nothing they do stops the hits.
Exactly. Eventually, the brain registers a complete disconnect between action and outcome. The individual learns, on a deep neurological level, that their behavior has absolutely no impact on their environment. They believe they have zero agency.
That's terrifying.
And the really terrifying part is that once this state sets in, even if the environment changes and a clear opportunity to escape or improve the situation presents itself, the person will not act. They will simply endure the suffering because their brain has been irrevocably conditioned to believe that trying is futile.
It is like being trapped in an elevator and you press the call button 100 times and nothing happens. Eventually, you just sit down on the floor and stop pressing the button. Even if someone outside eventually unlocks the door, you don't even try the handle.
That is the exact mechanism.
Hmm.
Learned helplessness is the utter collapse of the resilience muscle, and Pillar 3 is engineered entirely to prevent you from sitting down on the floor of that elevator. It is about aggressively cultivating a sense of agency, meaning, and control.
So how do we artificially restart that engine of agency? Let's look at day 5, Friday. We have broken this into a two-part task. What is part A?
Part A is the deployment of microgoals. Your mandate is to take the massive, seemingly insurmountable crisis you are facing and fracture it down into one single, highly specific, actionable micro goal that you can definitively execute and complete today.
The key word there being execute.
Yes. Let's use the example from the APA source material, Navigating a Devastating Job Loss. The macro problem is enormous. You need to replace your income, secure your family's future, and rebuild your professional identity.
Right. It's overwhelming.
You cannot control the macroeconomic conditions of your industry. You cannot force a hiring manager to give you an offer. If you stare directly at the macro problem, the sheer scale of what you cannot control will trigger that learned helplessness. You will freeze.
So you have to shrink the cognitive
You
load.
have to make the target so small you cannot miss it. You cannot control the job market, but you can control spending exactly 45 minutes today refining the summary section of your resume. That is a micro goal. You can control sending exactly 2 networking emails.
And what does achieving that tiny goal actually do biologically?
It creates a micro surge of dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation. But more importantly, it provides undeniable empirical evidence to your brain that the link between your action and your environment is still intact.
Oh, that makes sense.
You executed a plan, and the environment responded. The resume is updated. You prove to yourself, I am still a functional agent in my own life. You reclaim your locus of control inch by inch.
Shrinking the dragon down to a size you can actually fight. I love the pragmatism of that. But if part A is about intense internal focus, part B of day 5 pulls a complete 180.
It really does.
The second task of the day is to do something specific to help someone else. This could be volunteering for a local organization or simply going out of your way to run an errand for a friend who is also struggling.
And here's where the listener might push back aggressively.
I certainly would. If I'm in the middle of the worst crisis of my life, my energy reserves are practically non-existent. I am barely keeping my own head above water. Why on earth would the APA suggest that I expend my precious limited resources trying to help someone else? Shouldn't I be ruthlessly conserving my energy?
It seems like a mathematical error in energy management. But psychological energy doesn't operate like a fixed bank account. It operates more like an engine. Sometimes it needs a spark to generate momentum.
Okay, go on.
When you are consumed by your own crisis, you naturally adopt the psychological posture of a victim. You feel diminished, powerless, and dependent on circumstances. You feel small.
You feel like life is happening to you.
Exactly. When you intentionally shift your perspective outward and take tangible action to alleviate someone else's suffering, you completely subvert that internal narrative. You step out of the role of the helpless victim and into the role of the capable provider.
Because a helpless victim doesn't have the capacity to help others. So by helping, you are actively disproving your own helplessness.
It is a profound psychological pivot. Fostering that outward perspective generates what researchers often call the helper's high. It tangibly rewards the brain, reinforcing your own self-worth.
Wow.
Yeah, it provides undeniable proof that you still possess value, that you are still capable of making a positive impact on the world even while you are bleeding. It injects a deep sense of purpose back into a life that currently feels entirely chaotic and meaningless.
That reframing is incredibly powerful. You aren't giving away your energy, you are generating new energy by reminding your brain of its own utility. And this pursuit of meaning leads us directly into one of the most fascinating concepts embedded in the APA material.
Post-traumatic growth.
Yes. The source talks about remaining open to self-discovery, and it hinges on this phenomenon called post-traumatic growth. We hear a massive amount of cultural discourse around PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, where trauma leaves permanent psychological scars. But post-traumatic growth suggests a completely different trajectory. What exactly is the mechanism here?
Post-traumatic growth, or PTG, is a well-documented phenomenon where individuals who survive profound psychological earthquakes report an entirely unexpected outcome. It is crucial to clarify that this is not the toxic cliche of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Right. It doesn't mean the trauma was good.
No, or that they are glad it happened. The pain remains entirely real. But in the aftermath of the devastation, they experience a profound psychological evolution.
An evolution born out of necessity.
Yes. Think of it like a literal earthquake. Your core assumptions about the world, that the world is safe, that you are in control, that bad things don't happen to good people, those assumptions are the foundation of your psychological house. A massive trauma is an earthquake that levels that house to the ground. You are left standing in the rubble.
Which is terrifying.
But because the old structure is completely destroyed, you are forced to rebuild. And in the process of rebuilding, you have the opportunity to construct a new house with much deeper, stronger architectural foundations.
You can't rely on the old illusions anymore.
Precisely. Survivors who experience post-traumatic growth frequently report discovering a reservoir of inner resilience they never knew they possessed. They often develop a drastically clarified sense of what actually matters, leading to a much deeper appreciation for the simple fact of being alive.
Or they find that the crisis acted as a brutal filter for their social circle.
Exactly. Burning away superficial connections and leaving them with a core group of intensely authentic, battle-tested relationships. Finding purpose in Pillar 3 isn't just about surviving the current darkness. It's about maintaining the radical openness that navigating this nightmare might fundamentally reconstruct you into a more profound version of yourself.
Standing in the rubble and deciding to draw up better blueprints. I really like that.
Okay.
Okay, let's recap the protocol so far. We've secured the perimeter with connections in Pillar 1. We've armored the biological hardware with wellness in Pillar 2. We've reclaimed our agency and purpose through micro goals and helping others in Pillar 3. This brings us to the final and perhaps most difficult phase of the training. Micro goals give us control over our actions. But to complete the structural engineering of resilience, we must assert control over our perceptions.
Which brings us to Section 4 of our protocol, Day 6 and Day 7, focusing entirely on Pillar 4, which is embracing healthy thoughts.
There is a concept from the source material here that essentially serves as the cornerstone of cognitive behavioral therapy. It suggests that the objective event itself, the bankruptcy, the divorce, the injury, is fundamentally neutral data. It is the story you tell yourself about the event, your subjective interpretation, that dictates your emotional and physiological response. As the concept goes, you may not control the event, but you maintain absolute custody over your interpretation.
It traces all the way back to the Stoic philosopher Epictetus. People are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them. It is an incredibly empowering concept, but implementing it when your nervous system is on fire is exceptionally difficult.
Right, absolute custody of your interpretation sounds great on a coffee mug, but how do we operationalize it? Let's look at the protocol for Day 6, Saturday. The task is to practice cognitive flexibility through a technique called decatastrophizing. We are instructed to actively identify and dismantle one irrational, absolute thought pattern.
To understand decatastrophizing, we have to recognize how the brain processes fear. When a severe crisis hits, the brain's predictive machinery goes into overdrive, and it defaults to the language of extremes. It relies on absolute cognitive distortions.
It deals in always and never.
Exactly. The internal monologue sounds like, I failed this project, therefore I am a total failure, therefore I will never recover my career, therefore my life is completely ruined. The brain links a single negative data point to a cascading chain of permanent catastrophes. And because the brain is generating these thoughts, it registers them as objective facts.
And your body reacts chemically as if that total ruin has already occurred. You feel the panic of the worst-case scenario right now.
Yes. Decatastrophizing is the deliberate surgical interruption of that cognitive chain. You have to step back and act as a hostile witness to your own internal monologue. You interrogate the thought.
Give me an example.
So when your brain says, my life is completely ruined, you challenge it with evidence. Is that an empirical fact? No. The fact is that I failed this specific project in this specific month. It is incredibly painful, and it will have consequences. But it is a single chapter in a very long book. It is not the conclusion of the entire manuscript.
You are forcibly returning the event to its proper, isolated proportions. Now, a major component of Day 6 also involves cognitive flexibility regarding the acceptance of change. The APA notes that true resilience requires the ability to accept that certain goals, paths, or dreams may no longer be realistic due to the altered circumstances of the trauma.
And this is where people often fundamentally misunderstand the psychology of acceptance.
I can see why. Because if someone says, you just need to accept the change, It feels indistinguishable from saying you just need to give up. If I've spent 10 years building toward a specific goal and a crisis derails it, telling me to accept it feels like an invalidation of my grief.
It absolutely feels that way initially. But in clinical psychology, acceptance is not synonymous with approval. It doesn't mean you are happy about the change, and it certainly doesn't mean you aren't allowed to grieve the immense loss of that future. Acceptance is fundamentally an energy conservation tactic. It is a harsh, pragmatic survival mechanism.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. How does acceptance conserve energy?
Imagine you are an elite runner who has trained their entire life for a specific marathon, and 2 weeks before the race, you suffer a catastrophic, irreversible knee injury. The absolute objective reality of your altered circumstance is that you will never run that specific marathon.
Devastating.
Truly. But if you refuse to accept that reality, if you remain inflexible, you will spend massive amounts of psychological and emotional energy fighting a war against physics. You will be consumed by anger, bitterness, and denial, endlessly throwing your energy against a door that has been permanently welded shut.
You are pouring all of your cognitive resources into a black hole. It's exhausting, and it yields zero forward momentum.
Exactly. Psychological acceptance is the excruciating process of looking at that welded door and acknowledging, I cannot go through there anymore. It is a profound grieving process. But the moment you accept that reality, you stop throwing your weight against the unyielding steel.
You stop fighting the door.
Yes. You instantly free up all of that vital psychological energy. And the critical function of resilience is, what do you do with that recaptured energy? You redirect it. You pivot. You start scanning the hallway for a different door that is actually unlocked. You cannot possibly build a resilient path forward if you are spending 100% of your energy denying the reality of your current coordinates.
Acceptance isn't surrender. It is the strategic redeployment of your remaining forces. That is a completely different paradigm. All right, let's bring this protocol to the finish line. Day 7, Sunday, the final day of the foundational training. The task here is the active practice of realistic hopefulness. We are instructed to deliberately visualize what we want to happen next rather than obsessively ruminating on what we fear.
But we must navigate this task with extreme precision, because visualizing what you want sits dangerously close to the precipice of toxic positivity.
And toxic positivity is the ultimate cultural trap right now. It's the good vibes only mindset that demands we ignore the burning building and just smile through the smoke.
Which, as we discussed on day 1, is deeply invalidating and biologically harmful. Toxic positivity is a form of emotional avoidance. It is a refusal to engage with reality. The APA draws a very sharp distinction between that kind of denial and true pragmatic optimism.
Okay, so what does realistic hopefulness actually look like then?
Realistic hopefulness does not ignore the fire. Realistic hopefulness stands in front of the charred remains of the house and acknowledges the total devastation. It fuels the grief. But then it asserts a powerful cognitive pivot. It says, this is a disaster, but I believe that if I deploy the right strategies and I put in the work over a long enough timeline, I possess the capacity to clear this rubble and eventually build a new structure.
It acknowledges the severity of the baseline, but insists on the possibility of an upward trajectory.
Yes. And the reason visualizing this upward trajectory is an assigned task on day 7 is because of how the brain's default mode network operates during stress. When we are traumatized, the default state of the brain is rumination.
We just loop it over and over.
We obsessively, compulsively loop the worst-case scenario. We visualize the total collapse of our lives over and over again. And the brain, not knowing the difference between a vivid thought and reality, triggers the stress response every single time we loop the tape. Ruminating paralyzes you.
So realistic hopefulness is actively hijacking that predictive machinery.
Exactly. You are consciously wresting the steering wheel away from the fear center. You have to force your brain to map out the next viable steps.
It reminds me of the foundational rule they teach in high-performance race car driving.
Oh, I don't know this one.
Yeah. If you lose traction and the car starts spinning out of control toward the concrete wall, your biological instinct is to stare directly at the wall you are terrified of hitting. But the physics of the human body dictate that your hands will instinctively steer the vehicle precisely where your eyes are focused. If you stare at the wall, you will drive into the wall.
Wow.
So the drivers are trained to physically force their eyes away from the impending crash and look exclusively at the open track, the exact path they want the car to follow.
That is the perfect encapsulation of day 7. Realistic hopefulness is the immense discipline of forcing your eyes off the wall. You aren't pretending the wall isn't there. You know the danger is acute, but you understand that dedicating your visual and cognitive resources to the threat will only guarantee the collision. You must relentlessly focus your processing power on the open track, constructing a mental roadmap that your actions can actually follow.
Amazing. Okay, so that completes the 7-day resilience protocol. We have systematically built our external connections. We have fiercely protected our biological wellness. We have forged new purpose through micro goals, and we have disciplined our cognitive interpretations.
It is a dense, robust framework.
It really is.
Yeah.
But before we close this deep dive, we have to address Section 5 of our outline. We call this the professional boundary, and it is perhaps the most important caveat in the entire APA literature.
It is essential that we normalize this boundary. The APA goes out of its way to emphasize that building resilience is a messy, nonlinear, lifelong process. You can diligently apply all 4 pillars, you can reach out to validators, you can force yourself to sleep, you can practice cognitive flexibility, and you may still find yourself profoundly stuck.
What are the clinical markers of being stuck? How do I know if I've hit the boundary?
You know you are stuck when the structural load of the trauma continues to vastly exceed your current structural capacity despite your best efforts. It manifests as an ongoing inability to function in your baseline life.
Right.
If weeks or months are passing and you still cannot physically get out of bed, if your relationships are actively deteriorating, if you cannot execute your job, or if your thoughts are becoming dangerously dark, you have hit the boundary.
And the danger here is that someone listening to this 7-day protocol might try it, still feel completely overwhelmed, and conclude, well, I tried the APA's best strategies and it didn't work. I must be fundamentally broken. I failed the resilience test.
That is the exact internal narrative we have to dismantle. Reaching the boundary of your own capacity does not mean you failed the protocol. It simply means the kinetic energy of the impact was too massive for a solo operation.
So what's the next step?
The actionable critical advice from the APA is that seeking the intervention of a licensed psychologist, psychiatrist, or clinical mental health professional is not a white flag of surrender.
To bring it back to structural engineering, if you are trying to renovate a house and you discover the main foundational beam is cracked, you don't just keep hitting it with a hammer and hope for the best.
Right, you'd be crazy to do that.
You bring in a structural engineer, you bring in specialized heavy equipment to stabilize the load while you repair the damage.
Precisely. A clinical professional acts as that structural engineer. They provide advanced scaffolding. They possess highly specific, evidence-based tools like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing for trauma, or advanced CBT techniques that you simply cannot administer to yourself. Seeking professional help is framed by the APA as a proactive, highly strategic, and necessary escalation in your resilience training.
It's an escalation, not a failure.
Yes. It is you taking ultimate executive control over your own recovery when the DIY methods reach their natural limit.
It is the ultimate act of agency. All right, let's do a final synthesis of everything we've unpacked today.
Let's do it.
The foundational truth is that psychological resilience is not a trait you were born with. It is an active structural process you build. In Pillar 1, we establish our external scaffolding, seeking out intimate validation and ambient collective belonging to counter the toxic isolation of stress. In Pillar 2, we defend our biological hardware, violently protecting our sleep and hydration to lower our allostatic load, while widening our cognitive aperture through mindfulness to fight tunnel vision.
Beautifully summarized.
Thank you. And then in Pillar 3, we combat the paralysis of learned helplessness by reclaiming our agency through achievable micro-goals and subverting the victim narrative by helping others. And finally, in Pillar 4, we take custody of our interpretations, aggressively challenging catastrophic thoughts, accepting the reality of closed doors to conserve energy, and keeping our eyes locked firmly on the open track.
And if the load becomes too heavy, we strategically call in a structural engineer to help us carry the weight.
Exactly. It is a phenomenal blueprint.
It really is. But I do want to remind the listener that this 7-day schedule is just the introduction. You do not run this protocol for 1 week and suddenly become bulletproof to the tragedies of life. Resilience is an ongoing, daily maintenance of your psychological infrastructure. You will fall out of practice. You will have days where you isolate and ruminate. The goal is simply to recognize the drift and return to the pillars.
It is a lifelong practice. As we bring this deep dive to a close, we want to leave you with a final thought to carry with you as you navigate whatever storm you might be facing right now.
We spent some time discussing the phenomena of post-traumatic growth. I want you to reconsider what your ultimate objective is when you face adversity. We culturally define resilience as the ability to bounce back.
Right, the whole rubber band analogy.
Exactly. We imagine a rubber band being stretched to its absolute limit and then snapping back to its original shape. We assume the goal of surviving a crisis is to eventually return to being the exact same person we were before the crisis hit.
But what if that is aiming entirely too low?
Exactly. What if the true objective of psychological resilience isn't just about bouncing back to your old self? What if the goal is to remain open to the possibility that this devastating event, this massive kinetic impact, might actually be the forge required to hammer you into an entirely new, infinitely deeper, profoundly more capable version of yourself?
A version of yourself that you haven't even had the privilege of meeting yet.
Precisely.
Don't just bounce back, bounce forward. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Now get out there, audit your infrastructure, and keep your eyes on the open track.